First of all, I would like to introduce me from my point of view, not the official introduction, but just to create an understanding about each other. So I come from experience as a teenager and young professional in social movements. Then I entered local authorities, so I have been working as a civil servant in local authorities. Then I moved to a university, and as part of the university in Portugal, not in Italy in these moments, I have been doing consultancies on participatory budgeting and academic studies in 54 countries around the world. So what is interesting of that is that you see the same object cut and stretched in different way, in different culture, in different institutional situation, in different societies, in different economies, not so much because we have a world mainstream on that. And I come from a family of politicians, so both my grandparents were governor, mayors, and member of the national parliament in Italy. And so I come from a perspective in which I always try to integrate this different point of view, civil servants, social movements, and the politician view, in order to try to have a more complete view on the object that we will be dealing with. I think it's very important to use different languages also, so I also have been doing a documentary that you can find in 3 languages on Vimeo, if you want. It's called A Quiet Revolution. It's about participatory budgeting experience view from the point of view of Portugal, which is one of the countries with a higher density of participatory budgeting in this moment in the world. And what is my vision of participation, which is a buzzword, so not necessarily we have the same vision, so just to understand which is mine. I think that I don't consider participation just a tool of governance, but more as a learning space in which all the actors can learn through doing. So while we do things that can improve our quality of life, we will be learning and understanding the complexity. I think this is the big problem that the left face today, not using slogans as many of the right-wing parties, and try to make people understand that the reality is complex and that we have to deal with it, trying to simplify it, but without reducing this complexity, which is necessary to face in a collective way. It's also for me the space where you meet your hated neighbor on the base of common rules and common goals, maybe for your neighborhood, for your area, but a person that you normally wouldn't like to go out with or to talk with, you recover a sort of brackets, a parenthesis in which you can dialogue with this person. Is also a space to provide people, all the people, from the politician to the citizens, to come out different from how they entered in the process. So it's a place for personal evolution and social evolution in the relation with the other, learning how to listen, having rules that allow us to do something that we are not used to do in daily life, which is learning to listen to the others. For me, it's also a conflicted field. I don't like to present participation as a solution-oriented tool, because problems remain even when you try to hide them. And so I consider it conflicted in the sense that participation needs to be crossed, and is always crossed by conflicts. The more you hide conflicts under the carpet, the more they re-emerge in the worst moments, and so they do not allow you to have a good result. And finally, I like the definition that a participant I interviewed in a participatory budgeting said to me, that participation is like love, because it makes possible to do together things that alone you will never be able to do. So the idea that we are joining forces through participation and created alliances that make result more effective and more sustainable. In this sense, I think it's important to remark what is obvious. I use the terms of the sociologist Pedro Ibarra, that define two big families of participation. Participation by irruption, so when people conquer a space autonomously, so raise the voice in the cyberspace as well as in squatting buildings or filling squares. And participation by invitation, when citizens receive conceded spaces by the institution in order to negotiate and dialogue. Obviously, it's not possible to separate these two typologies of participation, because when people continue to use the first one, it means that the second one is not working, that there is something we have to wonder what it is that does not make people feel at ease in this process, and so they continue to use the participation by eruption. This is important to say because today the majority of institutions that offers possibility of participation by invitation, so formalized spaces, get very angry of people continue to use the first family, and they criminalize them in many cases. So it's important to know that there's still family dialogue all the time, and so that's why I put an image of a group protesting for the lack of sewerage systems during a participatory budget meeting. So silently they raise their protest, but they respect the rule of the space. So it's possible to do the two things together. And the perspective I have on participation is that in this triangle that was synthesized by Joan Subirats, that now last week has been named as the Councillor for Culture of Barcelona municipality by Ada Colau. There are three ways to get incidents. No? Here we are in a political party, so the main driver of your action normally is to stay within incidents. So electing members that can work together with the institution to try to have effective results for the projects you have in mind. But obviously outside the institution there are other ways. We know a lot the resistance, not through pressure, but I think that participation must enter in the dissidence area. Dissidence is done by innovative social practice, which creates new imaginary. Sometimes resistance is referring to old imaginaries that want to restore or to save from transformation, while dissidents experience effectiveness through sacrifice also in some cases. For example, if we talk about the alternative economies, no? Sometimes just following the rhythm of nature means that I love tomatoes, but I use tomatoes only in a small piece of the year, because for the rest I don't like to use greenhouses, and so I have to give up to tomatoes. Normally I could buy in the supermarket tomatoes 12 months per year. So working on alternative economics, working on forms of fair trade means giving up to some commodities of daily life, but in order to show that an imaginary is working and can become a mainstream for society. So that is a little bit my vision that I think is always important to express. So the way in which I have been working in these 20 years of participation is at the crossing, at the junction between defense of human rights, so creation of new rights. I don't think that participation is worth if you don't create and support rights. The provision of basic services and social policies of proximity in the local, but at the same time, it needs to have a larger breadth, which means trying to deal with holistic and integrated policies and programs, which in some cases are not municipal, they deal with other level of the state, and with peacekeeping, for example. I'm working a lot in Colombia now, where the peace agreement considered participation an important chapter of the recreation of the state and society. And finally, I think that it's important to focus on the fact that we are in a society in which perception weighs as facts. So in many cases, when institutions organize process of participation, their good faith is not enough. It's very important to get step by step what is the reaction of people about what is being done, because in some cases perception of people are so strong that they can interrupt the chain of reconstruction of trust, which is one of the main drivers of participation. No? We do participation because we understand that we are in a society where people do not trust, in the majority of cases, not only institutions, but social mediators, NGOs, environmental movements, parties, trade unions, churches. No? So we live in a society which is different from the past, and the so-called self-representative are not enough for people. So to create a virtuous circle, we can, between people and institution, we have to ask to ourselves where we can start. And I think we are here in a somehow party structure, and people who still believe in the possibility of institutions and parties to change society, because we think that it's possible from the institution to activate a virtuous circle of relation with society. So the Democratic Deficit book that some of you will know by Pippa Norris from Harvard University, it's very important because he analyzed the gap, the deficit between institution and people, and it analyzed how part depends on a bad behavior of institution. But a part of the deficit depends on good elements. The fact that human rights, education, the internet as a vehicle of new information, they have created larger awareness of rights, especially in young generation. So if they are unsatisfied of institution, it's also because they know better than the previous generation their rights. And so that's a positive fact, the evolution of society, which creates a negative effect, which is a mistrust in the institution. Okay, so it's important to have this vision. I'm not teaching it to you, I'm trying to tell you that's the way in which I work with this main principle. And I think that on this point, we have to do a mea culpa of the majority of participatory process we have around the world, which are absolutely not interested, or they don't look like interested to people. So they do the process as if it was an extension of bureaucracy, of technocracy, of the institution. They divide the process by department, by themes, so in a way that the citizen, who's naturally holistic in his approach or her approach, cannot understand, because he reproduces the institution in the social domain. So we have to change point of view and try to build process for the people, and so in their perspective, and not process as an extension of institution. I know that is more difficult, obviously, but the institutions are too inertial for being a good example for building a participatory process. So we have two trends in this moment of participation, of which I would like to talk today. The first one is scaling up, which is very important, especially for small countries like this, that like Portugal, where I live. They do not have a lot of administrative mediator between the central state and the municipalities. In Italy, I have 3 or 4 orders of institutions that can create a chain of evolution and scaling up of the innovation. Here we have municipalities and the state. And the second one is the construction of multi-channel system of participation, where different participatory process to involve different typologies of actors will work together to avoid another characteristic of present participatory processes, which is the fragmentation and separation. So each councillor, each minister want to take care and dominate his or her own participatory process. And again, the vision of people are holistic and more and less fragmented, so they do not understand this typology of behavior. So I don't think, unfortunately, in per se, the central states, and even more the European Union as a regional entity, can be a good space for participation. The European Union has demonstrated it several times with the citizen initiative recently now that required a lot of effort to collect signature, to present a proposal to the Parliament and the Commission, and then they end up in nothing. They don't have visibility, they don't have even respectful answer from the European institution. And several experiments the European Union did, like deliberative polls with representative citizens from 27 countries to discuss about enlargement of the European Union, migration, that did not have any knowledge. Only in the academy we know that this existed, costed 2 million euros, but it's a completely politically meaningless process. No? So the problem of European Union is it's not able to give any meaningfulness to the experiments it does in the area of participation. And national states have been having a lot of problems, and I think the main reason of this problem has to be linked to the fact that people do not recognize the central state as a legitimate actor for a direct dialogue. So, for example, in Portugal we have a national participatory budgeting, and the states, even it puts money and commitment in doing things, they don't have any capacity to attract people. So the meeting of national participatory budgeting are organized by social movement, university and municipalities, because they are the only ones that are able to dialogue with people and attract them to the meeting. The state was completely failing in this dialogue. And the bad thing that is happening is that many of my slides disappeared, and I don't have an idea why, but it's okay. Participation is not just a one-on-one dialogue, and unfortunately technology has tended in the last year to transform it in a one-to-one dialogue. For example, in the planning system, I don't know if in Slovenia it's like this. Normally the institution proposes a plan, and they ask two individuals to comment on the plan, and everything happens with a one-to-one relation between people and the institution. So people, they do not dialogue with each other. No? So this model for me is not even participation, it's a form of social communication, but is missing the central issue of a participatory process, which is to foster also the dialogue between citizen and social organization. So the dialogue within society that then produce a request to political and technical institution is much more stronger normally. And so the type of participation we want to talk about today is this type, where there is a high quality of deliberation within society and then the dialogue with the institution. The dialogue with the institution can have different degrees. For example, this is the IAP2, the International Association for Public Participation Spectrum, which is a modern reinterpretation of the ladder of citizen participation created in 1969 by Sherry Arnstein. And so the idea of effective participation is an idea of a participatory process that happens early, happens continuously in all the phases of the creation of policies and projects, is responsive, so get answers from the institution, is oriented towards common good and not only working on summing individual perspective, and is constructive and solution-oriented, producing visible effect, and is capable to include. So we have this a democracy who, which Bobbio said, has a lot of unfulfilled promises. Participatory democracy is meaningful when it's trying to complement the representative democracy, guaranteeing more inclusion and more equality, also in relation to subjects which are not included, like children, really in the representative democracy. Because even if they have rights, they don't have political rights until they are 18 in many cases, and so in some referendum they are 15 or 16, but for many years children breathe the pollution of the air produced by the adults, but they cannot say anything about that, so they don't have a voice. So the importance of participation is to enlarge. If participation just reproduces the exclusion of the representative democracy, is meaningless. In the central states in Europe, we had some interesting experience in the last years. Possibly you know the experience of Iceland, where a constitution was written by citizens, but then was blocked by the parliaments, because representative politics always have some antivirus against participation, some demophobia inside. So here in this case was that the new constitution has to be approved by two parliaments. The first one approved and the second one rejected. And the fault was much inside also the social movement and the groups that wrote the constitution, because they didn't want in any moment to discuss with representative politicians. And so there was a sort of revenge of the new parliament saying, you don't want to dialogue with us, we have the power to say no to your proposal. So if on both sides they have been more dialogic approach, maybe the new constitution of Iceland would be approved. In Italy we have a very bad experience of 100,000 professors who participate to the writing of the law on the good school, but then their 100,000 proposals were completely ignored by the government, and the law was done so badly that in the end the protest obliged to step back in almost all the content of the law. So the question is, why you waste so much energy and you waste so much social capital asking people to spend free time to give you suggestions if you have already from the beginning the idea that you will never even read what the people has been writing to you. And a good experience, just to give a bit of optimism, which is the Irish Convention that changed some part of the Ireland constitution through a mixed approach. It was a constitution that was mixing 66 citizens, random selected from the country, and 29 politicians plus 5 or 6 politicians from Northern Ireland. Okay, so this process created some good ideas that were submitted then to referendum, as the same-sex marriage that was approved with a large majority by a referendum. And so it's an interesting experience that through the tool of random selection created an important work on an important thing that is constitution. These are other experiences that have been working in a transcalar way or at the level of regions. In Europe, for example, we have several participatory processes which are led by association of municipality, by regions. Here I put some images of Poland. There is a law of 2009 that reimburses from 10 to 30% to municipalities, rural municipalities that are doing participatory budget rural villages. Then we have here the Brazilian national conferences, which are organized in 3 levels, municipal, state, and national level. and build the national social policies starting from this pyramid. And then here you have the region Lazio that created a law in 2005 for which all the budget has to be discussed with people, and provided 16 million euros for implementing a culture of participation at local level, funding municipalities, that especially small municipalities that were implementing participatory budgeting. At national level, here we have the case of France. Public Debate is an institute that was approved in '95 with a series of laws that have been improving a long time. Also, last year there was a casualty, a guy who died in the protest against, I don't remember which infrastructure in the center of France. And the state stopped and they approved the law that reinforced the participatory institution called CNDP, Commission Nationale du Débat Public, which is an independent authority named by the President and the Minister of Environment. So not by the opposition. That's different with my institution, for example, in Tuscany, where I have been elected by all the parliament, including opposition. In this case, it's just the majority. But the Minister and the President could be formally in France of different political forces, so they have to agree with each other. And the débat public discuss huge infrastructure and even policies like the atomic energy and complex issues like that. The public debate in France was born as a national one. In Italy was born as local in municipalities. The first big experiences was in Genoa for planning an auto route, an auto highway. And then was adopted in 2007 by the Tuscany region where I work, by the office where I work now, but at the time I was in the social movement, trying to approve the law for obliging the region to use public debate. This is the last one we did on the harbor of Livorno. So for 6 months and then 1 year with the technical studies, we discussed about citizens. We did like just 2 weeks ago the final meeting with 300 persons to inform about what the port will realize, the Port Authority will realize of all the things that have been said during this period of debate. And after the Tuscany experience, last year the Italian government put the Institute of Public Debate in the national law on tendering, so as an anti-corruption measure. And now all the big infrastructure in Italy, starting from the 1st of January of next year, will be subjected, all the one that cost more than 300 million will be subjected to public debate. Okay, so it's a case in which from the municipal level the innovation went to regional and now to the national level. What is very important in public debate is the role of counter-expertise, and I wanted to underline this because when people do not trust politics, they do not also trust the techniques. So all this technical judgment and production that is imagined by people as dictated by the interest and not by technical ethics, of professional ethics of this person. So what we do in this project is allowing people to choose some experts from their side, like you do in a judgment, in which can present a different vision of the technical issue involved by the infrastructure, the equipment, the policy, what is going to be discussed, in order that people can observe this interaction between technical expertise, knowing that some expert has been named from their side, and maybe the final result will be a little bit more neutral because of this pluralism in technical visions. This is the case of Taiwan, a country that do not exist because the majority of countries are so scared of China that they do not recognize Taiwan. Taiwan emerged in the international panorama because of innovation. You know that in 2014 they had the sunflower revolution. This lady there is a transgender minister of digitalization. She was a civic hacker, and that used participatory budgeting, and one of the central tools to prove the behavior of the previous government. And after the Sunflower Revolution, the mayor of Taipei, the prime minister, and the president were elected among independents and changed completely the Taiwanese panorama. So participatory budgeting was a central feature, and you can see the construction of some counter website of all the ministries of Taiwan. They were created in order that people could know, using the open data of the ministries, could understand the policies, because the ministry puts all the raw data completely ununderstandable. And so the hackers create a counter sites instead of .gov where .g0v, and they put some up in order to people to be able to read finally this impossible data. And the last thing I wanted to say in general, before passing to participatory budgeting, is that I think is, may I use some monitor? I think it's very important the role today of networks. Okay? In many countries there are in this moment networks. I here mapped in red the countries that have a national network of participatory budgeting institutions that do mutual exchange of experiences. There are transnational global institutions like UCLG, the Federation of Mayors, that has a committee specific on participatory democracy and social inclusion and human rights. The OEDP, that is located in Barcelona, the International Observatory of Participatory Democracy. Here you see the network of Brazilian participatory budgeting. Many of these networks interact at global level in international events. I would really like that with your growing experience in participatory budgeting, also institutions from Slovenia could be more present in the international scenario, because there is a lot to learn and a lot to transfer to other places. Self-referentiality unfortunately does not help to improve innovation in the due time. And so let's pass to participatory budgeting, which is one of these tools that have more benefited of international network. When it was born in Brazil, for 10 years it was only a Brazilian thing, until the World Social Forum brought to the world attention, and the Forum of UN Habitat in '86 brought to international attention, and they started to spread around the world through also social institution. For example, Associazione Rete del Nuovo Municipio is an institution that makes people and local authorities in Italy around participatory projects that created a charter in which participatory budgeting was an important element of the dialogue. So today there are very interesting international, this book came out 3 months ago, International Policy Diffusion and Participatory Budgeting, that explain how participatory budgeting can be imagined as a sort of ideoscape. So an ideoscape is not a model. Is a model who constantly evolve with the practical experience, and so is a completely changing model, because it's evolutionary. It evolves with the institution. So it's not a still model, it's an ongoing model. And so, as you can see now, for example, in participatory budgeting in Paris, that was born 3 years ago with 105 million euros dedicated each year to the decision of the population, already created 47 imitations in France. So in France there were almost no participatory budgeting in last year, and in 3 years Paris gave the example and allowed to create interesting things. This is in Portugal, where since 2014 exists an association called RAP. So RAP means in Portuguese Association of Participatory Municipalities, and they exchange technical stuff that goes and study in other places. So they do cooperation with Mozambique and Cape Verde, for example. But they met in the beginning of this year, and they discussed for 2 days a charter of the quality of Portuguese participatory budgeting, which does not say how PB has to be done, but at least 13 principles they have to be respected. Some of these principles are almost revolutionary, because in many participatory budgeting they don't exist, like involving people all in the social control of the implementation of things, all the pedagogic aspect of Freirean learning and these kind of things. The Association of Municipalities in Portugal was also one of the responsible in 2015 of the proposal of the Socialist Party to have national participatory budgeting for the central governments. That was then implemented by the mayor, the Prime Minister, which was the mayor of Lisbon who created participatory budgeting in Lisbon, and when became Prime Minister, puts the program line on participatory budgeting in the government program. And so we started in 2017. We had 3 processes here in different areas: culture, agriculture, adult education, science, schools, and now youth and sport policies. You see the growth of participatory budgeting in Portugal from 1 in 2002 to 118 in 2016. We have 300 municipalities, so we have more than 1/3 of municipalities doing participatory budgeting in this moment. This is another important network in Italy. It's the network created around an experience in Bologna 3 years ago, which is the ruling document about, it's called the ruling document for the care and the regeneration of commons, which is a structured document that more than 170 cities in Italy now adopted, which is about the self-management of public abandoned spaces or sub-used buildings through relation with movements and informal groups of civil society. In Bologna, out of 400 agreements that have been done in these 3 years, 40% are done with informal movements. So group of citizens that meets around the will of co-manage public space and public services. So they are not formal groups, they are not NGOs, and so they needed a legal document to approve this kind of difficult collaborations. And this is a series of observatory of analysis of social policies and participatory policies that are mushrooming around the world. And the final thing is the importance of cooperation in this moment through the networks. Many of the African process of participatory budgeting are coming in this moment from Europe because of international cooperation, even from countries like Norway and Switzerland that have no participatory budgeting, but that they force in their cooperation on the institution in Africa to have participatory budgeting. And so what is interesting is that the process is methodologically consolidated and going around the world, obviously with some loss in translation, and for example, the emphasis that participatory budgeting had in the beginning on the issue of social equity and social inclusion. The recent growth of PB is mainly metropolitan, so now we have the participatory budgeting of Paris, 500 million in 4 years. Then we have Madrid, 100 million per year to participatory budgeting, and other big cities which are a metropolitan level investing on participatory budgeting. There are some interesting experiences also in the domain of technology. As you possibly know, the experiences of the Better Reykjavik, which is using a technological tool which is similar to the one used by the Pirate Party. And in Africa, some regions started to use participatory budgeting compulsorily. At the moment, there are 2 countries in the world, Peru and Dominican Republic, that have a law for mandatory participatory budgeting in all municipalities, districts and regions. And here in South Kivu, many municipalities raised 3 times more budget than in the past, because participatory budgeting showed the capacity to avoid people not paying taxes and helping higher level of the state to transfer the money to municipality. They used not to transfer, saying that local authorities were corrupted and so they didn't deserve to get public funding. Obviously also regions and provinces and ministries can be corrupted, but it's less visible sometimes than a local authority. In the case of Mozambique, they now has a similar project in Mexico on mining areas. So transnational enterprises using local mines that were not paying the royalties to the municipalities, and now through a strong network of municipalities with Transparency International, the World Bank, they create an observatory, and the participatory budgeting is sometimes the proof that they are distributing well all this money that now is compulsory coming from the mining enterprises. Okay, so that's to give you the word frame in which you are involved. I think that it could be interesting to try to define participatory budgeting for who is not familiar with it. So participatory budgeting is a decision-making process which entrusts citizens, intending not just formal citizens, but people who live in a territory, to decide how to allocate a part of a budget of a municipal institution or other budget that affects them. Why I say that? Because now we have a lot of outsourcing and privatization of agency for the states and the municipalities. So in some cases, the budget of this institution are separated by the municipal one. So if in a local authority you have an agency for tourism, an agency for housing, an agency for water, an agency for environment, it's completely useless to do participatory budgeting at municipal level without involving this agency. So agencies are a very important element, and there are cases like in Toronto, the housing agency of Toronto that does his own participatory budgeting could be interesting. So participatory budgeting is a tool for learning by doing space, which is strictly linked to a vision of the right to the city. When participatory budgeting was born in 1989 in Brazil, there were a lot of fights through participatory budgeting for affirming and claim the right to the city center to poor people, because traditionally politicians wanted to sell the noble area in the center and send the small slums outside in the outskirts. And through participatory budgeting it was possible to reallocate poor people in the same area where they used to live for decades and try to increase their capacity of self-reliance through enrootment in the center of the city. So it was a radical tool, not just a small governance tool for small things. How much is politically important? I think that is very important because budget became a bureaucratic tool, and several participatory budgeting in the world, they do not have the name of participatory budgeting because they are scared that the word budgeting can be scaring for people, because it calls idea of something very technical that only a technical elite of super expert can manage. I did some inquiry, some survey before some Italian participatory budgeting, and when I asked to people in which sector of the municipal policies you think you can give your useful suggestion, the result on the sector budget was 0, because people think they cannot say anything useful on the budget, because this is a super expert thing. While the usefulness of participatory budgeting is that it repoliticized the budget, especially in the timing, because what happens with your budget, municipal or national budgets, there is an interesting story of the father of Winston Churchill, that was Minister of Finances in the UK, and his political career ended up in few months when he decided to approve the budget 2 months before the deadline, because he imagined it so people can discuss on the proposal, and then the deputies in the parliament can discuss and doing a good work of improving the proposal. And the Prime Minister did not want this. He wanted the budget completely closed, published the day before the voting, so that the majority had to vote for it and the minority had to do what they want, but without any possibility to discuss the budget. That's what's happening in all our institutions. Now, the budget is delivered 16,000 pages, 48 hours before the discussion, and there is no discussion. So participatory budgeting creates a proposal from the start of the year to the end of the year, so that it's possible to start to have a discussion on the content. So it's a help also for councillors somehow, for representatives who at this moment are not put into condition of discussing the budget. And what is not participatory budgeting? Is not a process without influence on future policy, so it's not a process of discussion of the budget, like the mayor say, oh, this is our budget for next year, I will present to you and then I go away. Okay, and you can tell what you want, but there is no time and no condition to change the budget. It's not a Luna Tantum event, so like a presentation of the budget. It's a long 3, 4, 5, 6 months project that has to deal with conflicts and with complex issues. And it's not a devolutionary process, like the World Bank has this so-called community-driven development, so they take budget and they give to beneficiaries and say, use for your sake, no, without dialoguing with institutions. So participatory budgeting was born to recreate a dialogue between people and institutions. So institutions are very important inside. How does it work concretely? There is not a one-fits-all model, okay? So what is important is the participatory budgeting is a 2-cycle process. One cycle is decision-making and the other cycle is implementation and evaluation. Without the second one, next year, don't expect to have people discussing participatory budgeting if it does not create really effect in the authorities where it's practiced, will die soon. And that there are many cases of this type that did not implement things and then crash down. So normally it has a series of steps. No? First of all, participatory meetings, collection of proposal, technical analysis and feasibilities, vote on the projects, public presentation of results, and then finally implementation of approved projects. Some participatory budgeting have not the voting moments. In Germany, for example, there are still advisory participatory budgeting where people list a long list of things and then there is a cherry picking by politicians that say, okay, I will do this, this and this without explaining why I chose this, this and this among the long list of dreams and wishes that people has delivered. So these are very frustrating normally. The reasons to have participatory budgeting can be very different. So you have to know what the hell you want to do before creating a methodology, because methodologies are strictly related and have to be coherent to what you want. For example, there is an interesting article by Arcon Fung from Harvard Kennedy School of Government that differentiate 2 types of processes, deontological and consequentialist. It's like the deontological one, they do not know why they are happening, because they think that doing democracy and participation is good and so they do it. And maybe they have some surprise, but they just don't express a goal. The consequentialists say, I want to do transparency, anti-corruption, I want to do social inclusion of minorities, and according to that they create the model, and according to that they evaluate the results. So this process are the minority, but they are most coherent. And so in Europe we have very different model of participatory budgeting, depending a little bit on the political culture. Just to do an example, when I started working for the Association of Municipalities of Sweden, I asked the president, why are you wanting to implement participatory budgeting around Sweden? Because you have 86% of confidence in the politicians. So the reason why we do participatory budgeting in all the rest of Europe is that we don't believe in politicians. And they said, no, but the problem is that we are there in the World Value Survey. So we are the country in the world farthest from any traditional value, church, family, homeland, and closest to individual self-expression, okay? So for you it seems a good thing, and you want to reach Sweden there, but in reality, we are a country without a population. We don't have civic bond. We have a very passive population that just lists needs to the municipality or the state and wait for solutions. So we want to change this and create a real community. So we want participatory budgeting for creating community. In Denmark, the reason to do participatory budgeting is small rural municipality have people escaping because they don't have services there. Not services, more cultural equipment, events, they are dead places. So the first question of the Danish rural participatory budgeting is, what do you want in your city that guarantee that you're not escaping from it, from the village? No? And so you see that in every country you can have different reasons to do PB. And PB normally deals mainly with investments because they are the most flexible and visible part of the budget. But there are cases in which also expenditure are being discussed or even revenues. For example, in this case in Peru, there is a strict relation between the reduction of tax evasion by people and participatory budgeting. More a neighborhood will pay his taxes as they were due, the more we get of money next year in participatory budgeting. The relation with transparency pass through understanding, so these are African processes that try to explain how works with murals, how works a participatory, a budgeting of the municipality in relation to the budget of a family. And then this is a poor municipality that has no money to publish anything about the budget, and so writes the municipal budget on the walls of the municipal building in order to make transparency of its budget. Who participates in participatory budgeting? There are three models. This is the case of Spain. So individual base, every citizen can participate, propose and vote. Cases in which only the municipality, all this some organization that is listed in a municipal list have the right to participate, and mixed model where in some part of the process NGOs or organized group participate, but then the voting is done by all citizens as individuals. The idea originally in Brazil was that in a society of individuals, it's good to motivate individually persons and then to make them enter in arenas in which they have what John Elster called the civilizing strength of hypocrisy, because people in a public space, they have to negotiate words, they have to explain what they want, what the benefit will be of what they are proposing. So it's important to motivate the individual, but create common space to enlarge the social value of our discussion. But in Spain, maybe many movements and groups of local citizens boycotted PB because they were losing their capacity of negotiation. They wanted to have the monopoly of the negotiation with the municipalities. So to have public spaces was a danger for their power. And so they boycotted PB. Like I assisted in Rome to this boycott where posters saying there will not be the meeting of participatory budgeting has been cancelled with fake logotype of the municipality. In order the people was not going and they could say this is an illegitimate process because there is nobody here and these three cats cannot decide. Okay? So there are many tactics for the social movement to destroy this type of processes. And so Spain has to negotiate and many cities create a mixed model in order to avoid to disappear. But there are many types of models based on territory, teams, specific actors like women, elderly, children, immigrants. The methodology can be face-to-face, virtual, or in the most cases mixed, and the typologies of decision-making can be co-decisional or consultative. So, people arrive in the end to vote for their priorities and list the order of priorities they want to be realized, or consultative, they're just doing a wishing list and politicians then do cherry picking on that. The second method is completely crap. I'm not saying it ideologically, even if my ideology was in that direction, but the reason is that it doesn't change anything in the factual, in the present power, distribution of power, because who had to decide will continue to decide. And so the impression to people is nothing is changing. No? Like in Tomasi di Lampedusa, everything is changing for nothing to change. But it's not that the reason that I use with mayors to explain normally why this is not good. The reason I explain is that in this model, to get a minimum of confidence, of trust, you must explain all the no you give to people. So if you say no to 300, you have 300 proposals and you can do 5, you have to say 295 times no and explain why no. And it's a very tricky thing. You waste a lot of time to explain 295 no, and many of the explanation you give are not believed as the true by people. And so why you do this boomerang, why you spend so much time for not having any benefits in the relation with people. And so that is a model which is disappearing, except in cases where trust is still strong, like in Germany. And in terms of organization, the traditional Brazilian model, big assembly with 2,000 people, are not functioning. It didn't function in the end in Brazil and never functioned in Europe. So since the beginning, the European PBs are mainly organized by large rooms with small table, where a small number of people is around the table with a facilitator, and the idea is that everybody could speak feeling at ease. If you are in a 3,000 person room with this position, no? Someone frontal speaking from here and you listening there, possibly nothing changed in the political and civic culture of people, and only the one used to speak will speak. And so normally the structure given to participatory budgeting is that we can imagine as a line Christmas tree. So every year is a triangle. In the first year you have a group of people here strongly debating the ideas and proposals, and then is open to votes, and a larger number of people, which is maybe more lazy, will come to click and send their votes. Okay? So in the case of Cascais, which is a right-wing municipality with which I work in Portugal, in the first year there were 600 people here and 6,000 here. Today there are 80,000 here and 1,200 here. So even the number of who is working hard for doing the proposal doubled, but mainly is multiplied by 9 the number of voters. And you know how many people vote in the election for the mayor in Cascais? 28,000. So 58,000 vote the participatory budgeting, 28,000 votes for the mayor. And so just to understand that, I hope that this year was changing. The thing that some effect was retro affecting the election, nothing. Cascais had the same exact standards of all the other cities. Less 2% of white ballots and less 2% of non-voters, but there was no change in favor of the mayor in relation to the past. So many people in Portugal, where the non-voters are around 65%, they consider that this thing is interesting, so 34% of the population vote for participatory budgeting, but then much less go to election because they are not interested to all these promises. So people is continuing to separate the two things, even if, in our vision, there is a lot of work to do to make understand that if participatory budgeting is producing effects, it's because the mayor is a good person and is following the indication of PB. But that is not a click which is natural in the majority of people. So, finalizing, the participatory budgeting has to be changing constantly to adapt to reality. This is a vision of resilience. So, if the economy, the society, and the institution change, participatory budgeting has to find its new ways to function in order to adapt to society. And the best way is to use a self-ruled document, so not very tough document approved by the council, which you need 2 years to change, but principle approved by the council in the constitution of the city, and then year by year a modification of rules according to the evaluation of how it worked the previous year. We must be very careful to create downgrading, so sometimes reducing the money, introducing new gatekeepers or new actors that can block the process in the middle, can create a disappearance of people, because as I told you, perception of people are very hysterical and very sensitive, so if I do something to downgrade the process, normally the effect is a suicide of the participatory budgeting. That is the studies on the dead participatory budgeting. But if I do the thing before, there are several positive benefits of PB: growing confidence in institution, more effective articulation of political programs in time, because political programs, you know, they are all on the same level. But in reality, they happen in time. So something is more important to be done soon than other, and PB can help in that. Facing more easily the cuts and financial constraints that affect year-by-year municipalities. Making, for example, sewerage system visible, because normally before election you don't do sewerage, you do bridges and parks because they are visible on the surface. But sometimes the neighbors need something underneath. And with participatory budgeting, the underneath become visible and can be used in political marketing, can be used in negotiation, so this is a value. Better ownership and maintenance of public spaces by inhabitants, better integration of non-citizens, better coordination of offices with other social dialogue. In some context, fiscal civism, and as we will see in the next slide, also an increase of votes for mayors that are doing PB since several years. Obviously, there are some losses and costs. First of all, that the discretionality of decision-making of an institution partially will be limited, because people will be deciding instead of them on some parts of the budget, and the time and energy to listen to the constituents and show accountability and responsive. So the time you need to give answers, because the most terrible thing you can do is wasting the time of people and then don't even answer why you took a decision or not. For example, in the law of participation I work with in Tuscany, the main articles say that all the institutions doing participation are obliged in a certain amount of time to give an answer. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, but they have to answer to the people that did proposals. So this is a case like in Chicago, where there have been an increase of more than 15% of the voting for the local mayors who did participatory budgeting. Per se, we could ask, is PB a tool of inclusion? So it's able to pass from segregation to inclusion? Inclusion of everything, also animals, as I put there in the image. So who has not an independent voice and need mechanism of advocacy? So the answer of all the studies that exist say no. PB per se is not a tool of inclusion. It becomes a tool of inclusion if you have it as a goal and you do specific policies for making it inclusive. I will do an example. These are indigenous ladies in Cotacachi in Ecuador. Specific training courses to make ladies aware of budget issue as their husband or their men were. And here, Niaganyao in Senegal, in the Park of Baobab, what was the problem here? That in the participatory budgeting there were 65% of women, but nobody was speaking. So the mayor was thinking, why I have so many women and they are silent? So how useful it is to have young people and women that they do not speak. What is changing in relation to the previous decision making? And then he realized that the problem was what we can call self-censorship. So if in the culture the elderly people are important, okay, the others, they do not talk before of them. And they never say something against what they have proposed. And so in the end, women and young people were staying silent, not to contradict the elderly. Not that the elderly were saying, shut up, you are a woman, or shut up, you are a young person. No, but self-censorship is sometimes worse than censorship. Because in front of censorship, someone reacts and riots. In front of self-censorship, nobody reacts normally. You cannot ask lady, why don't you speak? Speak, lady, why you are there silent? You humiliate a person in a public meeting, obviously has no positive effect. So the mayor created some assemblies of homogeneous people, women, young people, elderly. Each one has 2 representatives and they converge into a council that was equally represented every group. And so many of the issues raised by women and young people passed to the voting, were reorganized by the council, and then we're voting individually in a secret ballot by people. And here we have problem in traditional society that if you do a test like the World Bank did in Afghanistan, you discover that in a public meeting where people are raising hands to vote, you say very different thing is called apparent consensus. Then if you do the same voting with secret ballot and you discover that the priorities are completely different. Because society is censoring you somehow. There are inequalities which are hidden but strong, effective in society. So sometimes, for example, in China, in Mozambique, where there are strong powers of control by the institute power, people only accept to participate to PB if they have secret ballot for voting in a secret space. And that's the idea of inclusion that sometimes require temporary separation to prepare people to be equal. That happens with Muslim women, for example, in some society where they wouldn't be able culturally to speak with the Italian or Slovenian men, and so they have to be prepared before in order to arrive to have a similar voices. In the United States, there are specific groups in PB that work on women, inclusion of minorities. I did the training course in New York for people. I did in Spanish, because there are persons who don't speak any other language than Spanish, or Chinese, or Pakistani. And there are groups in New York that works with former prisoners that lost their political rights in order to involve them in the citizenry through specific measures. These are studies on women participation that show that it's very long path to include women. These are participatory budgeting specifically in Penang, in Malaysia, for women. These are participatory budgeting in Chile that have a specific tools for blind children. And so in the end, a participatory budgeting work mainly where there is a strong political will, possibly a good organized society, financial autonomy to propose and approve projects, a good organizational architecture, as we exemplified, and capacity of discussing the future co-planned projects. In these cases, participatory budgeting is able also to create a very interesting partnership with people. So in Africa happens often, in Latin America it happens that people donate soil lots to build public infrastructure. In Africa happens that people donate the workforce because they prefer to buy materials so to have more results, and they build things and their own. And I wanted to finish on the integration of ICTs because I think is a not eludible issue, because modernity is coming, so we cannot continue to do process in just in small meeting when we have commuters, young families that if they don't have incentives, like, I don't know, a babysitting session, they will never come to the public meeting. So how to take care of them, how to take care of the language of young people. And I think when participatory budgeting was born, there was a conflict with technology. The relation was initially very tense, but technology were used to call people and to control the implementation. Gradually, participation by ICT shows several benefits in terms of enlargement of group, timely responsiveness, increase of control, but also it started showing that it could create new problems, new digital exclusions, superficiality of people, you know, clicktivism. No, I just sit at home and I do a click, and so there is a not still a potential not still completely used for integration and inclusion and transparency. And then there are new problems, like for example, one is the redundancy of proposal. The more you open proposal time through the internet, the more people just logorically send things and proposal, and they don't read the others. So then you have 25 or 30 proposals very similar, and someone have to merge them. Yeah, and who is this someone? Sometimes is a technical bureaucrat. And this creates, obviously, a new lack of trust of people. But technology also creates a lot of possibility for new modes for voting. Well, I was studied in the Czech Republic how the result change if you have more voting possibility. The introduction of negative voting that show where tensions are located in public proposal. A series of a frugal machine that you can use in in-person meeting to accelerate the duration, which help the vulnerable actors that normally have not many hours to spend in public meetings. So, and then help to include young people more. But in the moment they will create also new gatekeeper, it's very important to keep attention on this risk. The new black box will destroy the process. And so I will finish on that I think is important. Before my small conclusion, I wanted to say, today the direction is to create a lot of channels for proposal, for specific target, for ICTs, for random selected people, and then create a common space of co-decision. Okay, so the idea is that of building, as in this case of Canoas in Brazil, a sort of system of participation with all the different channels of participation, the dialogue on top of a common platform. And I will, I don't know, well, I will finish with this. That is. So, in the end, what is concluding participatory budgeting? It's a new possibility to discuss how to spend the money, which can be useful also to discuss larger things than the money spent by the municipality. It's a new insight on economy that shows the economy is a place for alternatives and not just a mainstream that you have to follow without discussing it. And then it's a place for starting discussing about different vision on how to make people happier through discussion on equality and inclusion. For example, if you spend this, you will not get the result because someone will not be seeing the football match anyway. If you do this, you finally get a result that everybody is able to look to the match. You can do that is more fair because you're giving the same to everybody and you are respecting someone that somehow the difference. But for doing this, you need the double of money to buy 6 of these boxes, than you need here. So the interesting of participatory budgeting is that it's a space where the financial constraints can be helping choices related to equality, redistribution, and this issue. And so in the end, I think that what is important of thinking about system of participation is creating an ecosystem with different channels of dialogue to foster an ecology of different knowledge that converge to create an anti-seismic cage. You know, maybe this is not a seismical area, but in seismical area, you have to try to unite the walls of the house in order that they don't crash each one in a different direction, but they save the person. And so somehow the idea in the moment of delegitimation and crisis of democracy is that one from a political point of view. From a social point of view is to try to bypass this, what Boaventura de Sousa Santo called the abyssal line, which is a line to separate the north from the south of the world. And in each place there is an abyssal line between the rich and the poor, between the black and the white. But this is the word abyssal line. And we have to remember that participatory budgeting came from the south. So his power and his diffusion in Europe in this moment is in itself an important moment of overcoming of the abyssal line. And I think it's a reminder that PB can be small things. With small things you can develop big ideas, really political ideas, strong ideas, and that's why we wanted to provoke something with the discussion today. Thank you very much.
Okay, Giovanni, thank you very much for this.